I want to get to your opinion in the Hill that was I think that just hit yesterday. Kind of sounds like you are blaming both sides here. Like both sides kind of like it when these threats of the government shutdowns happen. But right off the bat, what's your gut feeling? The shutdown discussion's ongoing. Deadline is tomorrow at midnight. Where do you think we're at here?
Well, it's one of those times like I was in the studio last with you guys. We need to be cracking a six-pack to get through it. So
already done.
It is something that this is the fifth time I've gone through it. And if you think back, I was actually in the throes of a shutdown right after I got elected. It was like 3 or 4 weeks into January of 19. It is such a broken system with no budgeting, no framework around it. I really do believe the people that have been running the show, the career politicians for decades, like the threat of a government shutdown. That's how they get all this borrowing and spending at rates 5 to 10% above what they would be the year before. When I was in our state legislature for 3 years, we did in 3.5 months a biennium budget that interviewed all the agencies, all the stakeholders, always did it living within our means. None of that here. And it's now accumulated to $33 trillion in debt. We were borrowing about $1 trillion a year back in 18. It's now $1 trillion every 6 months.
Good Lord.
Shameful. And nobody here seems to think it's that big a deal. And in fact, just like my article read, I think it plays into how they want to grow government. Democrats, unapologetic. I've said it before, it's their growth business and their cathedral wrapped into one. Republicans, the neocons, the ones that won't budge an inch on defense, make the deal with them. And every year that's now what was $1 trillion a year, it's up to $2 trillion. Something's got to give.
Senator Jason Hammer here, and you bring up a great point about these Republicans, the neocons, as you call them. I believe it was a conversation you had with Tucker Carlson. I think it was early this year, where you stated there's like 10 to 15 Republicans that every time team up with the Democrats to give us this budget mess. Is that still the case?
It is, and I've termed it the Unholy Alliance because do you think the Democrats who believe in more government are ever going to shrink their side of it if we won't touch what's most dear to us? And believe me, it's the most important thing we do as a federal government. It's the only thing we have to do is defend our country. And we need to do it well, but they ought to do budgets. They ought to do audits. They recently, it hardly got any press, I think it was 6 to 8 months ago, did it's called a balance sheet audit. I couldn't believe the amount. It was $3.5 trillion that they were supposed to have. They could only find 39% of what they own as a Defense Department. That is waste at its worst. They've got a lot of room to improve, and until we put that on the table, the Democrats will never give up what they want, and that's how we do this same crazy thing year after year.
And you know what? It's not like you haven't been trying to do something about this. Tell us about, there's been multiple bipartisan pieces of legislation, bills that you wrote, the No Budget, No Pay Act with Rick Scott and Joe Manchin, which basically said, we don't get a paycheck until we start, spending, we come up with a spending bill. None of these pieces of legislation have seen the light of day, have they?
No, and Ron Johnson, the senator from Wisconsin, and I and several others want a no government shutdown bill, which you would think that would be the thing everyone would want. Leadership will not bring that to the floor. That was the point of my article with The Hill, because I think this whole system of doing no budgets, using a shutdown as a threat, is how they lever their way into this nonsense of borrowing and spending. The other thing we need is a term limits bill and a balanced budget statute or amendment. That's the only way you get the career politicians out of the game that have been running this place into the ditch for a long time.
And what's been the response when you bring up term limits?
It'd be a classic case of amnesia. Everyone campaigns on it. They get here and forget about it.
I have a feeling, Senator, this is I remember you announcing that you were leaving your seat to run for governor of Indiana, and one of the reasons was that you felt like, I mean, this is. You realized in your 6 years that this is a swamp, and there's very little I can do to change it. Is this kind of one of the reasons you're leaving your seat to the Senate and going to try to get some stuff done here in Indiana?
Well, it is kind of like talking to the side of my barn back home, really. And if I had to do it all over again, I'd do it. Somebody has got to get to where you quit complaining about it and you come out here and try to do something about it. I think Trump kind of personified half the country, teed off with business as usual. That's how he got here. It's such a hard, unwieldy place because of the vested interests. Everybody comes with their big hat in hand, wants more from it. The American public's going to have to say, we can't be part of a system that borrows 30 cents on every dollar. And I wasn't going to do this more than 2 terms. I would never have reneged on the belief in term limits. I practice what I preach. Coming back to a state, we are in decent shape cash flow wise. I've seen a few things that look like we teeter a little bit when it comes to how heavy our own government wants to be. I never imagined our own state government would say, you're an essential business, you're not. Yeah. Some of that stuff we did through COVID. I was the freshman Senate office that had to dust off a Congressional Review Act to get rid of that crazy idea of forcing a vaccine on all employees down to employers of 100 employees. Those kinds of things I don't know that we'll ever get away until this place hits the ditch hard and it's forced to change. I want to make sure we don't get anywhere close to that and keep faith, family, community, freedom at the forefront in our own state. That's why I decided to come back. And I'm an entrepreneur, business owner. We need one of them as the CEO of our state government, in my belief.
Senator Mike Braun joining us here on the Hammer and Nigel show. So, Senator, what do you think happens Saturday at midnight? What's the latest with what's going on?
This is mostly going to be a function of what can be done in the House. Just today, they floated a proposal, and it was many, many votes short of passing. I can guarantee you, whatever a Chuck Schumer Senate bill gets passed here is not going to be palatable over in the House, and it shouldn't be, because that would be that unholy alliance I've been referring to. So at some point, even though McCarthy has very little political capital to play with, I think his political life depends upon it. He's going to have to find out how he keeps the fiscal conservatives that have been right for a long time on what we need to do to where we get some reform measures as part of a spending bill. That's all we're asking. Pass a no government shutdown bill so at least you don't shut the government down. You don't give that tool to the borrowers and spenders. A no budget, no paycheck bill, and some rigor into a budgeting process. And if we don't get it, we're just kicking the can down to where we go deeper in the hole. Our kids and grandkids are even further in debt.
Senator, we got about 30 seconds left. Are you, your colleagues, maybe the members in the House, are you guys ready to ride this thing out for a long time if that's what it takes?
Well, I wish the first thing we do is get that bill of not shutting the government down, because I put this on the backs of the people that have been here for a long time that have profited from it. Sooner or later, though, essential workers get paid even through this to some extent. The pain would only be short term. We need major comprehensive reform. And if we do the same thing we've done in the past, don't expect that to happen. Sooner or later, you got to make the hard decision and ride it out.
Indiana Senator Mike Braun. Senator, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
You bet.
It's the Hammer and Nigel show.